The Raiders kicked some ass on Sunday, huh?
They did in. I'm not gonna try. Like, I'm not really trying to undermine this game. I was just my initial reaction to what you just said was they did in the fourth quarter. Because defensively they kicked ass. They really did. There were a couple drives where the Ravens were able to really drive on them. Run on them, get down the field. I know Divine Diablo had a missed tackle or two in this game. Some other guys I want to say had some missed tackles. And it looked like mid third quarter, it looked like, yeah, this is shaping up to be that telltale Derrick Henry takes over the game type of game. And it also could have easily been a telltale, yeah, Lamar Jackson took over the game type of game. But instead, what happened was, I don't have like any crazy notes or something. First quarter, I don't even know if anybody scored at all. I know the entire first half, it was all field goals. And I want to say the Ravens went into the halftime up 9-6. And at some point, I don't know if it was the second or third quarter, Justin Tucker missed like a 50 or so yard field goal, which ended up being the difference of the game, right? But then you get to the third quarter, like I said, Ravens start driving and scoring. Raiders at some point, got a scoring drive. And then fourth quarter, Ravens are up 10 on the Raiders. And Raiders get the ball, they go down the field, and I believe they scored a touchdown. Man, I'm trying to think of how the order went, but all that happened at the end of this game was I believe the Raiders tied it. Fuck. God damn it. Whatever happened. The Ravens blew this game at the very end. They blew this game. And really, Max Crosby took over.
Yeah, I personally was not able to catch the full game. And as soon as I was trying to watch the game this morning, so that way I could talk about it a little bit more and ask my questions on the show. Xfinity decides to do work in our area and completely cut off everybody's internet over nearby. But I'm just thankful that it's back on for the pod. But I mean, what it looked like to me was towards the end of the game. I mean, the Ravens were playing to try to not lose, and the Raiders just, they were resilient. They held in there, and I mean, they just flat out they just won the game. The Raiders' motto is just win, baby. And that's what they did. Like, was it the prettiest game that a team could play? No, but they just got it done. It was like a rally, and I just want to give credit to Pia's dad. He knew all along that the Raiders were going to win. He was the one person out of the 7 point whatever billion people on the planet who had the Raiders winning this game. So another thing I wanted to talk about was, I mean, all right. So last week we were talking very in depth about the Raiders coaching decision and how they chose Antonio Pierce over Jim Harbaugh. And, we had that discussion, but honestly, this might be the most impressive win that Antonio Pierce has had as a head coach. I don't know. I think this by far, and the Chiefs won last year on Christmas, I think those two are by far, but I think maybe, obviously the Chiefs were the Super Bowl champions, and, but the Chiefs were still at that point in the season, still kind of struggling to get it together. But this Ravens team is good. I know they're 0-2, but they're a good football team. Everybody had the Ravens winning this game. And, Minshew, I think right now has the highest completion percentage in the NFL currently, as it currently sits. Brock Bowers has, the most catches from a rookie tight end through 2 weeks and, since the 60s? Is that what the stat is? Brock Bowers is a stud. Max Crosby, from what it looked like to me, at the end of the game, Max Crosby had that big sack on Lamar Jackson, to force the Ravens, I think, to punt
That
or at
completely
least to back them
swayed.
up.
That play, I mean, it didn't actually end the game, but that was the play that, like, the Raiders took over the game. And
Mhm.
like, I did a pretty bad job of summarizing earlier, but really early on in this game, it was pretty clear that Max Crosby was taking over this game. Like, at halftime, he had a sack, 2 tackles for loss, a pass deflection, and I don't know if it was first half or second half, but Gardner Minshew threw an interception, and on the broadcast, like, the cameras cut to Crosby, like, catching Minshew and, pulling him aside and, like pounding on his chest and telling him something like this. And I was kind of joking, like, to my dad, like, yeah, he's telling him, like, yeah, dude, you fucking suck. But I knew what he was really doing was the exact opposite, which was, you're good, dude. Shake it off. We got you. That's what
Mhm.
Crosby was saying, for sure. And he was not wrong, because Minshew showed up in the second half of this game, especially in the fourth quarter, just dishing. The thing that Minshew said before week 1, when he was announced as the starting quarterback, he said that he needed to play point guard and basically just dish the ball out to the playmakers. And that's what he did. And that's, like, my opinion going into the season. Like, the optimistic side of me was like, this game is the fourth quarter of this game was exactly what the peak of this team can be this season. Of, they can match up with anybody, they can beat anybody, and if you just can get the ball to the playmakers, you can win these games. And they proved it. They proved it in week 2 against the Baltimore Ravens. Not only was it an upset, they had the biggest spread, as far as being, the underdog.
Underdogs.
I want to say that the Ravens might have been 9-point favorites. So, yeah. And then, the Raiders end up beating them by 3. I was just, it is way too early to say this, but this is a game that people can look back on and say, yep, that's why Max Crosby won Defensive Player of the Year. Like, I fully think that this game was an absolute statement game. Not that he needed to make a statement, but just, if you watch the game all the way through, Max Crosby owned the Ravens in this game. And he, not only did he own the Ravens, he owned the Raiders in this game. Like, pulling Minshew aside as he was going onto the field and just telling him, hey, we're good. We got you, bro. We're going to get you that ball back. Like, Crosby, his leadership is insane.
Yeah, no, I
And
mean that's exactly what he was. He was a leader. I mean, Max Crosby has been a leader, and Max Crosby is one of those players who is very vocal about wanting Antonio Pierce this offseason. And then, all right, so let's rewind a week. We're talking about the loss to Jim Harbaugh and, like, how the Raiders kind of look bad. Now, how are we looking at the Raiders? And I was one of those people, who was, on the Harbaugh side. I'm not going to act like I wasn't on that side. But 1 week later, and the Raiders have this impressive win. How are we looking at Antonio Pierce? I see it as, all right, this is a legit team that they beat. And the Raiders, they have been in every single game that they played since Antonio Pierce has been a head coach. Have the Raiders been blown out since AP has been a head coach?
honestly, the worst may have been last week against the Chargers. And really,
They
I
were in that
mostly,
game. We
they were
both
in that
agree
game.
they were
Yeah.
in it.
I think the final score is not telling of what that game was, because what ended up happening was Minshew had that weird, Khalil Mack forced sack, or whatever you would call it, where Minshew kind of got deflected and it got intercepted. And then they
Mhm.
went down and scored another touchdown, I want to say. So, regardless, like, they were in that game as a one-score game the entire way. It was just the turnovers. It wasn't like the coaching ruined the game. I mean, I know a lot of people had the opinion on the 4th and 1 decision, but I There's no need to talk about that. It's just it's about the turnovers. And in this game, I'm trying to think, I think Lamar did get intercepted. Actually, this is one funny thing to talk about. Um, I've heard a story that my dad, watching the Raider games in like say the '90s and whatnot, he was very is it superstitious?
Yeah,
Where
super.
like you think like, oh, if I hold my water a certain way, the Raiders will win, But if I hold the water like this, then they'll lose. Something like that, right?
Yeah.
So what I have heard was that my dad, if the Raiders were losing at halftime, he would go out and he would wash his car. And sometimes it would work. And they would win the game. So maybe a year or two ago, the Raiders were in a game that was very important. And I was like, I gotta do something. I'm gonna go wash my car. And believe it or not, the Raiders got absolutely fucking killed in that game. But on this past Sunday, I needed to wash my grandpa's truck, and I knew I needed to do it at halftime. And again, it was 9-6. It's like, yeah, we're in this game, but like the offense just isn't going anywhere. So I just turned on the radio and washed the truck, and it's like, based off of what I heard from the radio, it was not looking good. Like that was when the Ravens started driving. Offense still wasn't clicking. I think at this point, Minshew got intercepted. I want to say it was the third quarter. And I was just like, yeah, thank God I'm not watching the game. And then I came back and it's like the Raiders just scored a touchdown. Ravens have the ball. They force a punt. Raiders go down. And then I'm watching the game. It's like they win the game. I was like, I need to wash my grandpa's truck more often. So,
Yeah. So your dad, every single time he goes and washes the car, the Raiders win?
I highly doubt that.
Okay. Because I was going to say, I mean, does he just not
Yeah.
wash the car on Sundays or,
He
is
hasn't
how
washed
much
his car
sun
since
damage and
2002.
dust is, how much debris has built over the years on those cars, Mike?
Yeah, he probably broke the streak when the Raiders went to the Super Bowl against Tampa, and it's just been a curse ever since.
Yeah. The number says, "How about them Raiders?" Yeah, no, they won a very impressive game. I'll say that.
Yep.
Raiders won, 49ers lost. Just feels right. Yeah, that little Bay Area rivalry that we've got. Lucky says, yeah, the Ravens game had me on edge. Bowers and Devontae Adams got it going for us in the fourth quarter. Yeah, no, I mean we all know who Devontae Adams is. Like he is no secret. He's probably the best playmaker that the Raiders have on offense and that have had on offense in a long time. But man, Brock Bowers, like we talked about how they didn't draft a player of need, and they took the best player available. Brock Bowers right now is looking like the best tight end in football through 2 weeks. Through 2 weeks.
Yeah. He's
Aside
reminiscent
from maybe
of
George Kittle.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Like
mean,
they both look pretty good. Like I'm saying
yeah,
both players look good and not all the other tight ends are like I guess from a fantasy perspective,
mm,
but I think Bowers is consistently getting tons of targets and he not only that, he's catching them. It's not just targets that
yeah,
are being incompleted. Like it's an efficient safety blanket that the Raiders have.
yeah. Yeah, I knew Bowers, like I expected Bowers to be very good. There's like analytics that suggest that tight ends don't start very well in the rookie season.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, oh, Laporta's, he's a what do you call that? Like a 1 year not 1 year wonder, but a rarity.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen again. And then Bowers is out here probably on a better pace than Laporta minus touchdowns. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, it's very interesting, and this is kind of what I wanted for the offense was just like Devontae and Bowers. The only thing that's not working for the offense right now that I wish would be better is the run game, and I think we'll get more into that with the next, with our preview of the next matchup. But that needs to get better. Um, But as far as Antonio Pierce's biggest uh, gripe with week 1 was that he was very upset with the lack of getting the ball to the playmakers against the Chargers.
Yes.
And I felt the same way. Like, Bowers had a good couple of catches, but Devontae could have been used way more. Jacoby Myers, even Trey Tucker, right? And in this game, it was back and forth again, field goal, field goal, field goal, right? And like the offense wasn't getting there, wasn't getting there, wasn't getting there. Like a couple good catches for this guy, a couple good catches for that guy. Gardner Minshew wasn't he wasn't overly inaccurate like I expected. He did his one interception that he threw was admittedly bad. It was bad. But once the second half started, it was like, all right, let's get it to Devontae. Let's get it to Brock Bowers. And, we see the outcome here, But the defense, I'd say the big change for this week versus last week was that the offense got it to the playmakers as needed, but also the defense got the stops when it was desperately necessary, especially at the end of this game. And I have to give most of the credit to Crosby for the game that he had. Obviously, Patrick Graham, defensive coordinator. I think Robert Spillane had a very good game in this one. And yeah, we mentioned Minshew, Adams, and Bowers. Those were like the big stars on offense, if you will. So, yeah,
Question for you.
impressive win for sure. Yeah.
Question for you. So it's not just that the Raiders aren't running the ball effectively. It's almost that they're abandoning the run. What's up with that? Because I anticipated that this team's bread and butter was going to be a team that was going to run a lot. Want to milk the clock and then force. I mean, they've absolutely done the other half of what I'm about to say. They are making life living hell for opposing offenses. That's literally through 2 weeks. It seems like that's what they've been doing. The Ravens are they're a great offense. They didn't score a lot of points. They lost to the Raiders, and the Raiders don't have that. They're not putting together a running game to pair with this offense. Like, is Luke Getsy going to keep this up all season, or do you think at some point they'll implement a run game? What's going on, Mike?
I think when I was watching this Ravens game, I decided that the Raiders' top need on this roster coming out, right now, well, yeah, right now, but also really it's coming out of this season and going into, say, the draft, right? The biggest need for this team is obviously quarterback. Like, I know Minshew's been playing pretty good. His average depth of target is very low, which is not a very good sign. Like the deep passing is just not there, and that's probably not a good sign for like consistent success. But this West Coast offense, like it can work if you just get it to your guys, and his high, completion percentage suggests it's working. And beating the Ravens and Brock Bowers and Devontae Adams stat lines suggest that's working. That's good. It'd be great is if we could set up fucking play action if we ran the ball successfully. The second biggest need on this roster right now is a running back. It's not that Zamir White sucks. It's not that Alexander Madison sucks. It's just they're not special. They're not special, and I would also argue that the offensive line is not getting it done. It's obviously, especially in the run blocking. And I think the reason why they are, going away from the run game is because they can't develop it. They're just not able to develop it at all. Every run is getting stuffed. And it just comes to a point where it's like, are you going to be the idiot that keeps running when you can't run? Or are you just going to, halftime adjustment and start throwing it to your playmakers? I think Antonio Pierce post game saying, we didn't get the ball to our playmakers enough. That was really taken to heart, clearly. And it worked. Like, maybe, I didn't really get to answer your question about, like, how should we feel about Antonio Pierce now? That should show, like, hey, Antonio Pierce knows a little thing or two about his team, Even though he's not the offensive coordinator, he can openly go out there, kind of call out the offensive coordinator at the press conference, say, I don't know what the hell's going on here. Like, we didn't get the ball to our guys. We got to do that. And then week 2, they do it and they win against a top shelf AFC team. As far as like, I know this is getting ahead of myself, but as far as like the next couple of weeks, I expect the run to be developed. And I think that's going to be a focus, especially against the Panthers. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that will be consistent. They need to figure that out.
Yeah. Since we were just talking about, or since you just re-brought up Antonio Pierce, I have to say, one of the big things about him is that he's inexperienced, and I know I've used that when I guess not necessarily against him, but why I'm hesitant to appoint him as like the Raiders' long-term coach. Like I mean, he's going to get the experience as he goes along, and I think a win like this does very good for not just like team morale, but also like at the end of the season, Mark Davis is going to say, do I want to keep rolling with this guy or do I want to move on to another coach? If you see glimpses like this, I mean, if Antonio Pierce can just keep it, consistent, like he's probably going to have this job through at least next year. So I mean, you talked about wanting the consistency with Patrick Graham on defense. Right now, all the Raiders are, I mean, their defense isn't perfect, but their defense is definitely playing at a high level, much higher level than the offense. If they can develop that run game, I mean, I think we can increase expectations for the Raiders this year over what at least what we had last week. Last week, I mean, it was week 1 and the Raiders just lost to the Chargers and it's like, man, all right, let's get that top pick. Let's get Shedeur Sanders or the Manning kid if he's probably not gonna declare for the draft. He's probably too young.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
But no, maybe fortunately, because I mean, he won't go to you. He might go to the Panthers, who the Raiders are going to be playing this week. But yeah, I have to disagree with one of your points that you just made about the second biggest need being running back. I disagree with that. I think the second biggest need that the Raiders have is offensive line, and then maybe the third is running back.
Yeah, see, I
I do
think
agree. Zamir White, and Alexander Madison, they're not special in NFL terms. They're not. They're not dynamic. They kind of each have their own skill set, but they're not necessarily like a top tier running. They're nowhere near a top tier running back. But I do think you don't need that to have a good rushing attack. I think you can have a decent running game, as long as the offensive line is able to block their assignments and the running backs can at least hit the holes.
Yeah, I think on the offensive line, my thing is, I said in the group chat earlier, I don't think they have a glaring need right now on offensive line. I think that they just have injuries on the offensive line, and they're like masking it well.
Yeah.
Because the guy who was penciled in as the obvious starter this year at left guard has not touched the football, in training, really since training camp. And that's Jackson Powers Johnson. And, the point I was going to make, not regarding the offensive line, but really regarding the, getting the run game to get better, is right now, Colt Miller does not seem like he's fully healthy. He seems like a guy who is coming off of a torn rotator cuff surgery, who spent the entire training camp out until the final week, before the season started.
Yeah.
And then they're playing, the offensive line is playing like they have a backup at left guard, because they do. For some reason, it seems, from what I've seen of the stats, that Andre James is struggling a little bit. And I think the other thing to consider is that this offense did have a complete scheme change. So the guys like Colton Miller and Andre James, Devontae Smith just dropped a would-be second touchdown on the game.
Mm.
Or he didn't drop it; it was deflected, but still. You add on the scheme change for the offensive line, and that could also explain why it's not so cohesive right now. You know, because you also have returning starters in Dylan Parham and Thayer Munford on the right side, and they haven't exactly been 100% either as far as like consistency goes. Uh, and I want to say Parham was the starting left guard last year, so he switched sides. And then Thayer Munford, it was a 7th-round pick last year, so it's not like he's a seasoned veteran, you know. So I think my opinion is just we need the guards to be communicating, the starting guards to be communicating with the starting right tackles and developing, the consistency and that camaraderie between. When I say starting left guard, I mean Jackson Powers Johnson. I need to see Colton Miller at 100% and Jackson Powers Johnson developing that camaraderie on the left side of the line. I need Dylan Parham and whoever the starting right tackle is to be developing their camaraderie. Because if Thayer Munford is a guy who keeps struggling and gets benched for DJ Glaze, I want DJ Glaze out there. I want him to start getting those reps because he's not getting reps on the sideline. Like I'm rooting for Thayer Munford to be good, but from what I saw in the preseason, like DJ Glaze is not far off from being the starting right tackle. So I guess my point here is simply both for fixing the run game and as far as one of the biggest needs on the team, I think the needs are somewhat filled. It's just, can we get the right guy on the field? Can these guys be healthy? Can they mesh together and develop their camaraderie in this brand new offensive scheme? It's going to take a little while. So do I think it's the biggest need? No, not really at all. If Colton Miller has his season is entirely bad because he gave up 3 sacks this week, against the Ravens. Last week he gave up 2 to Khalil Mack. That's not good. That's not what Colton Miller usually does. That's why I say he looks like a guy coming off of a rotator cuff surgery, because he is, and a guy that didn't play he didn't do anything in training camp because he didn't. That's what he looks like. That's what he is. So give it time. I think he'll be good. Give it time. I think Jackson Powers will start this season. Give it time. I think Andre James will, come along better to this offensive scheme. Give it time, and I think the right guard and right tackle will mesh together better, and I think it will get better. I just wonder I think Zamir White is good. I think he's a good downhill power back, It's just he's not explosive, and he doesn't have anything special to him. That's why I say running back is a big need. If we could draft, next year's draft class is supposed to be loaded with running backs. So my opinion is just we have to draft a guy. Around the 3rd or 4th round, get a guy, please. Because I don't really want to see Amir Abdullah on the field. No offense to the guy. It's just, I'm pretty sure he's been in the league what feels like 10 years. It's probably more like 7, but still. It feels like he's been in the league a long time, and it's like, we don't need a 30-year-old running back on the field with the starters. We need a young guy like a Dylan Lobby. I don't know why he's not out there. So maybe it's because he fumbled in the preseason, and they're kind of like, all right, we need to get you, more onto pace before we get you on the field. But I just, to answer the question, and the long-winded answer is simply, I think the answers are there in the offensive line. It's just either they're not healthy or they're still developing. So.
Real quick, Lecky says it's exciting to finally to see that we finally have an elite defense. The last couple of years that was our weakness. Now we just need the offense to get it going. Yeah, during the Derek Carr era, it felt like the opposite, right? It felt like the opposite every single year, where it's like the Raiders could score points. I mean, maybe not like a high-powered offense, but they were able to put up points, but they just couldn't stop the other team. So, yeah, I definitely think it is. I mean, it's great for the Raiders that they finally, like, before they couldn't even stop a nosebleed. Now they, like, teams look at, like, opposing offenses look at the Raiders defense on their schedule, and I think they're like, fuck, I gotta face Max Crosby. Like, I know Mahomes has openly said that he hates playing against Max Crosby. And, that's one player that he just does not like playing against. And if that is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time saying that, I think that is huge respect to Max Crosby. Big
And
props.
I'll make one final point on this topic, and then we can move on to the upcoming matchup.
Mhm.
One player that I did want to mention, and I was talking about this with my dad during the game on Sunday, uh, who is not showing up in the stat column, but he very much is making a massive impact on a guy like Max Crosby, and that's Christian Wilkins. The stunts that these guys are doing, they are things of beauty. They are that is the best that is the best thing to look out for on a game to game situation for the Raiders. If you're watching the Raiders, watch Max Crosby and watch Christian Wilkins, because the stunts where Wilkins starts on the inside and then pushes the guard into the tackle, puts his arm on the tackle, and goes out while Crosby stunts in and gets a quick straight line speed rush straight at the quarterback. That is what saved the game against the Ravens. That sack against Lamar Jackson. We know Lamar. He is so good at getting out of the pocket and evading pressure. He couldn't evade that because Crosby was coming like a fucking missile with his
He
arms
was a
like
freight
this.
train.
Yeah, dude, his wingspans and just those stunts are unstoppable, damn near. And that is why I have said ever since Khalil Mack was on this team, they need to get a dynamic defensive tackle to pair with this dynamic defensive end, because then you can really make a fucking difference on defense. So, yeah, once they get that quarterback in there and hopefully a dynamic running back, you're going to have that elite defense, and now you're going to have, some excitement on offense to go with the Brock Bowers and hopefully Devontae Adams still. And suddenly, like, if they were to magically get the next CJ Stroud in the draft and the next Bijan Robinson, which that's very, both of those are very far fetched. But if the right scenario happened, where in my opinion, you just get those two positions filled with guys that can day one, just like a Brock Bowers, tell me they're not a playoff team. That,
Well, I mean, those are big ifs, to get a CJ
absolutely.
Stroud, to get a Bijan Robinson. Like, both of those are like top of the game. So, like, I mean, in order to get that, like,
You got to draft well.
yeah, and
On
then also
Telesco for sure.
you got to be in position to be able to select the right guy.
Yeah.
It's almost like you got to get a little bit lucky, and you know, we'll see what the Raiders' long-term solution is. So I think we're ready to sort of recap what happened with our picks, and then we can pick a winner for the final week. There's not really much to be said for the Panthers game, but we were both wrong. The Ravens lost, and Mike owes Pia's dad a bottle of 1800 margarita mix. Yeah.
Yes, fair bet there. Yes,
Yeah, fair
indeed.
bet. Mike bet against his own team. I mean, come on, Mike. Who just got that touchdown right now? Is that Darnell Mooney?
I did not see. I
It
must
is
be
Darnell
behind.
Mooney, 42-yard receiving touchdown. And I almost decided to pick up Jahan Dotson, so Enrique couldn't start him, which would have left him with Darnell Mooney, which that would have hurt. So
Yeah, it's funny because it yeah, that's a whole other thing.
yeah.
I don't know what the hell. Yeah, whatever. Who cares? Anyways, yeah. I just my mentality with the bet was simply, well, if I'm gonna be sad during the Raider game, at least I can win a 6-pack of beer. And if the Raiders somehow win, you know,
It
I
only
don't mind.
costed
Yeah, I don't mind coughing up the money for a margarita mix.
Yeah.
So
All right. So we both picked Ravens. We were wrong. Mike, I just have to point out, still has no correct picks. He's 0 for 4 right now. I at least have 2 correct picks. I'm 2 for 4. So, just so everybody knows, don't listen to Mike. Listen to Josh over here. Um, all right, Mike, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the Raiders versus Panthers game. I don't think there's much to say. The Panthers are a mess. They just benched Bryce Young in favor of
yeah,
Andy Dalton. So maybe their passing game might be a little bit better,
yeah,
but I don't think that offense is not going to do anything against the Raiders defense.
they shouldn't. And like I kind of mentioned in the recap for the Ravens game, this needs to be the game where the Raiders focus on developing the run and figuring the run game out. And if like you would expect them to do that against the Panthers, it's just a matter of can that help with future games. Not that they should be going into this game thinking about future games, but just develop the run. Get that going. Uh, yeah, I mean this is pretty simple. I'm definitely picking the Panthers to beat the Raiders. There's no doubt in my mind it's gonna happen. I'm going on fucking 6. I'm just kidding. No, the Raiders will win this game unless Andy
No take
Dalton
backs.
has some
No
magic in
take
him.
backs.
Yeah, no, unless Andy Dalton has some magic in him, which I don't expect. It feels like Andy Dalton has been in the league 2 years too long or something. Um, I don't know, but here we are. We're gonna face Andy Dalton. The Panthers will probably be like slightly better than they were with Bryce Young, but they lost Derek Brown week 1, their best defensive player, and that's reason alone, their defensive tackle, reason alone to believe Zamir White will have a great game against the Panthers. Potentially Alexander Madison too. Like this should be the telltale, just run the rock and kill this game, just own the line of scrimmage and all of that. Like this should be fun. And the fact like coming into the season, it was like, all right, we need to win week 1 against the Chargers because Ravens, that's going to be tough. And then, you have some favorable matchups the next 3 weeks. Panthers, Browns, Broncos, like that Browns game is a pretty it's a question mark, but Panthers and Broncos are arguably the 2 worst teams in football right now.
Are we surprised that the Raiders in going into week 3 are 1-1? At the beginning of the season, if you would have said going into week 3 they're 1-1, would you have been surprised?
No, because that's what I kind of expected.
Yep.
I was expecting Chargers win, Raiders win against the Chargers, and then lose against the Ravens. Like, not that I was hoping for 1-1, but that's what they needed to look at this season in the optimistic, we can make the playoffs view. You needed to be 1-1 coming out of that game. Now you got the Panthers, you can be 2-1, hopefully. Like, knock on wood. I don't want to jinx anything, but then Browns, beatable. Broncos, very beatable. Like, suddenly, they might be 4-1 team going into week 6 versus the Steelers. And then depending on how the Rams injuries are going, you got them the following week. And then you got the tougher matchups with like Chiefs, Bengals, whatever. But I don't want to get too ahead of myself. But right now, being 1-1 post Ravens game feels really good. A week ago, I was saying, yeah, man, let's get that first pick. And that's probably still the best for the future of this team. But yeah, I for the fact like for Antonio Pierce and this being a big game for Antonio Pierce and whatnot, it would be nice for them to go on a playoff run, So like at the end of the day, the Raider fan in me, that's what I want. So hopefully that's what we get.
I think best for the future of this team. I think for the Raiders is to keep winning games. Like I think for them is to make the playoffs because if you have a head coach that can go to the playoffs and the players are bought in, I think that's worth more than a first overall pick. Because you could get a Bryce Young. Like if there was like a guy who is just far and beyond, the best prospect, and it's like this guy is going to be, the best. I still don't know if it's a sure thing. You were pretty adamant about CJ Stroud a couple years ago, but CJ Stroud is not in this draft anymore. And let's look. Bryce Young was the first pick in that draft. Caleb Williams didn't look good last night. Hasn't looked good so far in the NFL. You know, like give me a head coach who knows what he's doing over the first pick. Now, if you said, give me a head coach who knows what he's doing versus Joe Montana, unless it's Bill Walsh or like like a Hall of Fame coach, right? Like a great coach. Then I would take the quarterback in that instance. But it's like yeah, give me prime Mahomes over a great coach. Give me prime Mahomes. So I'd say you have a better chance of winning the Super Bowl with great coaching than you do the first overall pick, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I just think, at the end of the day, the Raiders can trade up if they need to. It just, it takes two to tango in that scenario. And last year, I believe they were trying to trade up and they couldn't because teams like the Redskins, Commanders didn't want to, and that makes sense. You do have to get a little lucky, like you mentioned, as far as like the prospects being there on the board when you have the opportunity to pick them. We'll see how it goes. I would say look out for Cam Ward out of Miami. That's a guy who is very intriguing to me right now. And it's way too early for me to say, like, that's my guy. But dating back to last offseason, I thought he was going to go into this past draft. And I was watching some of his tape, and I was like, that's a guy, as far as a prospect goes, that's the type of quarterback I envision for a Raiders team that has Super Bowl aspirations. Like, that's the quintessential quarterback prospect that I want the Raiders to go for.
Bookmark it. September 16th, 2024, 1 hour and 18 minutes into the stream. Cam Ward, Raider. Mike's calling it now. If it happens, we have to dig. We have to dig for this moment. But besides that, like I look back, and so the Niners a couple years ago traded up in order to get a quarterback. They weren't sold, but they had 5 that they liked, or they had at least 3 that they liked. And I'm just thinking the right decision was Trevor Lawrence, right? But even Trevor Lawrence hasn't lived up to, to his draft profile. Was there a right decision to make? Like what quarterback in that spot? There were 5, and everybody was saying that was the most loaded draft class, for quarterbacks in a long time. None of them are fantastic. So, yeah, I would take the coach. I think yeah.
Yeah. And you know what having the good coach is big, Really, the best case scenario is having the good coach and the good quarterback, like the Chiefs do. Like, I would say most people would argue like the Niners do. There's different levels to that, but like Andy Reid and Mahomes are 2 arguable goats, whereas Shanahan and Purdy, it's like, all right, Purdy's the prospect that he was. He's playing very good, and Shanahan doesn't quite get it done at the end, right? But I would say one thing that I don't want relative to coaches or, the great quarterback, what I don't want is a quarterback who brings along this. I should probably choose my words carefully here. This like sort of sense of
entitlement.
That's the word I was thinking, like entitlement, but it's not quite entitlement. It's like, he has this, It's Shadur Sanders, man. I get very, very bad vibes. You know who he reminds me of, but not nearly as fun as a prospect is Johnny Manziel. Of this guy who he doesn't Shadur doesn't even fucking win. That's the thing. Like Johnny Manziel was winning, and he was making electric plays, and he was just like doing these street football plays. And it was like, dude, this guy's gonna be electric. He's gonna be the next, not Mike Vick or anything, but like
The next great
actually
quarterback.
the next great quarterback. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Whereas Shadur Sanders, it's like I say entitlement just because his dad's the head coach, and I couldn't help but wonder. Like he is a good prospect. I'll give him that. He's a good quarterback prospect. I just couldn't help but wonder because I had never heard of him. Like I didn't even know Deion Sanders had a son in college until he was the head coach at Colorado. And the next day, it's like, yep, Shadur Sanders is the starting quarterback for Colorado. It was like, okay, this feels different, doesn't it? You know, I just I don't like what I'm seeing. I don't like what
The vibe you get.
the vibe. I don't like the vibe. I do not like the vibe for Shadur Sanders. And I'd say the worst thing for this Raiders team would be getting a quarterback in Shadur Sanders who has this coach father who maybe at some point wants to force his way onto the decision making of the franchise. I just I don't want I couldn't touch that with a 6-foot pole, dude. I just really couldn't. I'd rather have a Cam Ward. I'd rather have Carson Beck out of Georgia. There are other quarterbacks. I know everybody's talked up this quarterback draft class as being bad, but you never know, man. Somebody could step up and be the guy. And hey, if nobody does, then start stockpiling 2026 or 2027 picks, whichever year Arch Manning is going to be in the draft, because that dude is going to be legit. He's got the Manning arm, but he's got Manziel legs, dude. He can run, which I did not expect. So, yeah, Arch Manning, whoever is the lucky team to fall into Arch Manning's lap, oh my goodness, franchise changing. But that is
Yeah.
2 to 3 years in advance from now, so there's no reason to worry about that right now.
I'm just glad that we're looking forward to getting another Manning into football.
Yeah, that's why I'm is so intrigued by him. The name definitely goes a mile, and it's funny because you talk about entitled and all that with like Sanders, and it's like, oh, Manning, like I'm sure he got some
Well,
entitlement, but I don't,
it's different. It's different. I
it's
think
different when you prove it.
no. The reason why it's different, and it literally boils down to this. I think Dion is very outspoken about the way that he runs the program and about, not just his son, but like, who's the corner? Travis
Oh,
Hunter.
yes, that dude, yeah,
Yeah, no, and he's a great player too. But like, Dion is the head coach, and so like literally, I mean, if Shador Sanders ever played poorly, you think he's ever going to bench his son? What happened? What happened?
Sorry, no, who is Sean Combs? Oh, did he? He was arrested. Sorry, I thought it was Luke Combs.
Finally, no,
I don't care about Diddy. Yeah.
yeah,
Anyways,
um,
sorry.
yeah, no, you had me looking at the football game, but uh, we're not talking about Diddy. But all right, the reason why it's different, Arch Manning, I literally have not heard Peyton or Eli mention Arch Manning
Right.
once.
Yeah.
They don't seem to necessarily like they'll help him behind the scenes, but they aren't actively promoting Arch Manning and not talking about his future. Like it kind of feels like Arch Manning is not at the forefront, whereas Shador Sanders seems like he's one of the faces of college football right now, and Deion Sanders is. So that's where I think it's a little bit different because like Dion is an NFL legend who is directly involved, and also
Yes.
that's his
Yes.
son. And Arch
Yes.
Manning is what, Peyton and Eli's nephew?
Yeah.
So that's why it's different. So
Yeah, and I'll even add on to that. Like, there have been so many ex players, sons, nephews, grandsons, whatever, that, play football and probably suck, and we never hear about them. Like, if Arch Manning sucked, we probably wouldn't care and we wouldn't hear much about him.
yeah.
But I think he's proving to be the guy that everybody's hoping he is in the small amount of plays that he has played for Texas so far. And that is very exciting. Whereas, uh, I don't know how I feel yet about Shadir Sanders on a complete, you know, all around look at it. It's just, if he's going to come with baggage, I'd just rather go for a guy like a Cam Ward who's like a similar, if not better, prospect. Whereas everybody's mocking Shadir Sanders to go top 10, and it's like, are we sure about that yet? That seems very premature. So,
Mhm. One last thing, just to wrap up, because we still are technically on the segment of Raiders versus Panthers. I think that the Raiders are going to win convincingly. Just to summarize, I got Raiders. Mike's got Raiders. And let's get out of here tonight and win. I mean, and watch some Monday Night Football while we still have some left.